Joshua bringing the Israelites into the land of Israel, the dividing up of the land amongst the tribes, and the period of the judges is our third unit in the first installment of our crash course in Jewish history, the Genesis of Judaism, from Abraham to King David. Joshua was the disciple of Moses. Moses famously was not given the gift of entering into the land of Israel. He died somewhere in the hills of Jordan, on the plateau of Jordan, overlooking the land. He got to see the land of Israel. And Joshua is the one who accompanied the people into the land. We see on our map that the Jewish people, and this period of history will be a transition period until we get to King David next week. And that transition period is one, as I said, of settling into the land and of the period of the judges. Joshua is camped with the Israelites opposite Jericho. And the question is the dating of this entry into the land. It'll largely depend upon our dating of the Exodus, which we discussed with different opinions, depending upon who the Pharaoh of the Exodus was. However, there are some historians, academics, who want to say that the Bible was written hundreds of years later, that the Israelites emerged out of local Canaanite populations and then created a origins myth. And we're going to see that we do have archaeological evidence that shows us that the Israelites were in the land all going all the way back to the 12th, 13th century BCE. And this is found in what's called the Mernafta stela. It's an inscribed stone found in Egypt that talks about the Egyptian campaigns to the north. And in it, it says that the Egyptians went to Gezer, and that Israel is laid waste. So we have uncontrovertible evidence that there was a people named the Israelites going all the way back to the period very close to the Exodus, maybe at least 100 years, the most 100 years later. Now, just to finish up the historical dimension of the Exodus and entering the land, we talked in the last unit about the Hyksos invasion, corresponding to the time of Jacob and his family coming from the north, the Aputer papyrus, setting down the description of the plagues in this Egyptian document, and also the Amarna letters. Now, the Amarna letters will talk about the invasion of the Israelites into the land of Israel. And these letters are written by Canaanite officials sent to Egypt and asking for help because the Hapiru have invaded, have come in, and have started to decimate their land. Now, one can notice that Hapiru sounds very close to Hebrew and could be, in fact, the same word. Other historians say that the Hapiru were an ethnic group that spread throughout the Middle East, so maybe not specific to the Hebrews, but we know that Abraham's origins are in Iraq and in Syria, so it could very well be that in fact is a description of the Israelites' invasion of the land itself. Very powerful historical document. We saw the Manetho about the slaves freeing themselves as fleeing. And we saw the Mernafta stela. Now, we have another very important, significant piece of archaeological evidence. When the Jews entered the land, they were right behind Jericho or above Jericho, are two mountains, Mount Ebal and Mount Gerizim. These two mountains are mentioned in the Torah. On the left here, Moshe tells the Jewish people that when they're brought into the land and they come to possess it, you should assemble the people and give a blessing and a curse on Mount Gerizim and Mount Ebal, symbolically describing the two paths they could take, the path of God, which would bring blessing, and the non-godly path, which would bring about curses and lack of prosperity. And so in the book of Joshua, it says at the time, Joshua built an altar to the Eternal on Mount Ebal. This is from the book of Joshua. An altar of unhewn stone. And to the left, we see a picture of a pile of stones. Now, this pile of stones is a very interesting pile of stones. And being an archaeological buff, for me, it fascinates me. When I go with my family and travel around Israel, let's go see. And they'll say, another pile of stones. But for me, this is Jewish history speaking to us. And what's curious about it is that generally, if it was a stone house, you would have the stones falling in and be laid along the ground. Or there would be a rectangle with an empty area in the middle. But these stones are laid out, as you can see, in what looks like a ramp on the right and a altar, rectangular or square altar on the left. Carbon dating showed that this, in fact, does date to the period of Joshua. And so there are historians who posit that this is, in fact, the altar described in the book of Joshua. Now, can we prove it? No. But once again, we talked about the art of history, of connecting the lines. We have the Jewish tradition that tells us this is what they built. We have an altar dating from that period. And if it isn't the same altar, then it's very close to what Joshua would have built. The other important historical unfolding of events that happened was the Israelite conquering of the land. And we talked a little with Abraham about the idolatry, which brought with it debased fertility rites, and particularly human sacrifice. So the Israelites had a mission, were told by the Almighty, that when you enter the land, you destroy all of the idols. And the people are given the choice. Give up their idolatry, leave, or they would be defeated militarily. And Yigal Yadin, who was not just a famous general, but also an archaeologist, he did digs in some of the important cities, Canaanite cities that were invaded by the Israelites. One of the most famous is Megiddo. There's also Chatzor in the north and Lachish in the south. And any of these three are certainly worth visiting because there are extensive archaeological remains from the Canaanite period all through. And if one has read James Michener's book, The Source, it's about the archaeologists who dig into these tells, which are villages that were inhabited and that eventually became hills because of all the layers of construction and destruction. And what Yigal Yadin noted is that if you look, and it looks like a layer cake, and they can date these layers by carbon dating, pottery. And if you look at these layers indicate that at a certain period around this time, around the 1200s BCE, there was a widespread destruction of these Canaanite cities. And Yigal Yadin says, I'm not a religious man, but I have to be honestly say that this parallels the description of the Israelites' entry into the land, where they often had to use military force to conquer these cities and to destroy the idolatry, and that would have been the layer of ash and of burnt villages. So we have many parallels. And when Joshua entered the land, he lived another 25 years, and during those 25 years, the land was divided up between the 12 tribes of Israel. And so here we have our map, our list of the 12 tribes of Israel on the left. Jacob had 4 wives, and between them, the 12 sons and 1 daughter, and the division of the land to the 12 tribes, which Joshua lived for another 25 years. The division, I believe, took 14 years. And with the death of Joshua began the period of what was called the period of the Judges. Now, the period of the Judges, during that time, the Israelites were what one could call a loose confederation of tribes. There was no capital. Jerusalem was not yet in Jewish hands. And there were still Canaanite populations, Philistine populations. In fact, King David was later rebuked because he was fighting wars, he was expanding the country, but had not yet liberated the land of Israel itself from the Canaanites, from the idolatrous human sacrifices. And this caused a lot of problems, as we'll talk about. Idolatry penetrating into the Israelite society. There was no central government. There was no central leader or ruler. The tribes had a family tribal structure of Beit Av, of patriarchal heads, who probably had a group of patriarchal heads, and then you had under them subfamily groups and individual families. The religious center of worship was extended from the Mishkan, the portable synagogue or temple or tabernacle, the word is used in English, which was the house of God built in the desert with boards and tents over it that housed the Ark of the Covenant and the menorah. Traveled with the Jewish people for 40 years, entered the land, and then was placed in Shiloh, which is north of Jerusalem. And you can go to Shiloh today, and there are extensive archaeological finds of Jewish religious life centered around that city. But the way it worked was that the only need for a central government was when they were attacked. Now, this loose confederation you could liken to the period in American history. People aren't aware that the Congress was really only set up in 1898 with the Congressional Convention. And from 1776 to 1898, the United States of America were a really confederation of states. It wasn't until 1898 that the power of the president was established to be stronger, and that the states had their representatives, but really the federal government was established. The army would not come until another 15, 20 years later under Jefferson. However, this period for the Israelites lasted 410 years. And the way it would work is if they were attacked, there would be a militia, a civilian population going to war, like we have in Israel today, except today we also have a standing army of 18 to 21-year-olds. But back then, there was no standing army. How did they have a leader? The leaders would emerge for each period, and for each, sometimes for periods of war. And these were known as judges, but they were most of them were also prophets. And God would come to them or come to the people and say, this is the person who is to be your leader. And they would receive divine direction. Now, some of the most famous ones are really very interesting personalities and don't really fit into the box. Deborah the prophetess, who was a woman judge. She judged the people. She and her husband, actually her husband led them out to war. But later in Jewish history, we see that they were kings and not queens. There were a couple of Jewish queens, but the Talmud says that you should appoint a king and not a queen. And the whole institution of kingship we'll talk about next time extensively. Another one of the famous judges was Samson, Shimshon. Here is a dramatic picture of him pulling down the pillars of the Philistine temple and thousands of Philistines going to their death after he was captured. Samson is very much a Jewish superhero figure, and we can't forget that the authors of superhero comics, Marvel, DC, were all Jews, refugee Jews, and Samson had superhuman powers of great strength until his hair was cut, which one could say was his kryptonite. And he also was very ambivalent about the Philistines. He wandered into their territories, had allegiances or dalliings with their women, and yet at the same time despised them as an enemy of Israel, and met his tragic death bringing down the Philistine temple. You also had Gideon, who was the son of a harlot and an outcast, but a gang leader. And when the Jewish people needed a strong warrior, they called upon him. This period will also see pious judges. Boaz in the book of Ruth, which is read on the holiday of Shavuot, is set during this period. It begins by saying, in the time when the judges judged. And the rabbis say, not only did the judges judge, the judges were judged. And what happened was you had a gradual breakdown of Israelite society, particularly civil wars breaking out, the people not rallying to the judges for the war to fight and defend, and 410 years later, the prophet Samuel had to emerge and to change the status quo. And this is where we will leave this period of history, around the year 1000 BCE. And for our next session, we will start with the story of the kings of Israel, King Saul and King David, and what is known as the First Temple period. As we conclude, I'd just like to finish with another quote, because we're concluding our first section from Abraham to King David. And we talked about Jewish ideas impacting the world. We talked about the giving of the Torah as being the guiding light for the Jewish people and for world civilization. And I'll leave you with the quote of John Adams, the second president of the United States. And in his words, he says, "The Hebrews have done more to civilize men than any other nation. If I were an atheist and believed in blind eternal fate, I should still believe that fate had ordained the Jews to be the most essential instrument for civilizing the nations."